Tonight, old concerns.
Let's face it, we've got a lot of people in leadership positions that are old.
After a new health scare for one of America's elderly leaders.
Plus, hurricane aftermath. Florida's Gulf Coast faces a long cleanup in the wake of Idalia.
And
we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
The anniversary of one man's dream.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Concerns over the health of America's aging leaders. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
And from our studio in Washington, I'm John Jess. Welcome, Faith Nation. Growing concerns for some of America's most experienced political leaders stemming from another startling health scare from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, the senator appeared to freeze up, speaking to reporters Wednesday in Kentucky. This is now the second episode for the 81-year-old Senate Minority Leader in recent weeks.
CBN Washington correspondent Hillary Powell is digging into the issue. Hillary, what's the latest on Senator McConnell's status?
Well, a spokesperson confirms to me that the senator's doctor has cleared Leader McConnell to continue with his schedule as planned, but this latest scare is really raising more questions about the age of politicians on both sides of the aisle. Nearly 30 seconds of sudden silence Wednesday from the Senate's top Republican Mitch McConnell during a press conference is raising concerns on whether he's still fit to serve in office. Video from a local news station shows after 81-year-old McConnell was asked whether he would run for re-election, he trails off and stares straight ahead for about 10 seconds.
Anything else you want to say, or should we just go back to your office?
The incident comes more than a month after McConnell had a similar freeze-up mid-sentence while speaking to the press on Capitol Hill. The following day, 90-year-old California Senator Dianne Feinstein appeared confused during a committee meeting.
Yeah, just say aye. Okay, just aye.
Nearly a fourth of Capitol Hill lawmakers are over 70 years old. No boundaries exist for a maximum age to hold elected office. GOP presidential hopeful Nikki Haley tells CBN's Faith Nation the status of a politician's mental fitness is pertinent to their ability to serve.
We seriously need to have a conversation that if you're going to have anyone above a certain age in a position of power, whether it's the House, whether it's the Senate, whether it's Vice President, whether it's President, you should have some sort of cognitive test.
ABC Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Jennifer Ashton says when aging, not being able to speak or respond on command is cause for concern.
Warrant urgent neurologic evaluation.
Hours after the incident, in a series of tweets, Representative Dean Phillips expressed concern for McConnell and says, though he supports term limits, he writes, it would require amending our Constitution. Nonpartisan group U.S. Term Limits contends age is just a number. What's needed is more turnover in Congress.
Age really is not an issue when you have regular rotation in office or term limits like our founders intended. So there's nothing ageist about term limits, but it does help solve the problem of our gerontocracy in Washington, which is getting severe.
President Joe Biden says he'll be in touch with McConnell. A new AP Norc poll released this week shows age continues to be a concern for voters. 3/4 of the public think President Joe Biden is too old to serve another term. And although Donald Trump is only 3 years younger than Biden, only about half of adults agree that he is too old to effectively serve another term.
All right, Hillary, thank you very much. Tonight, a stunning op-ed from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists announcing support for, quote, no-limit abortions up to birth. In a Washington Post op-ed today, the American College of OB/GYN and Society of Family Planning called for abortion on demand at any time for any reason, stating that abortions, quote, must be available without restrictions, without limitations, and without barriers. The statement was in response to another Washington Post op-ed by pro-life strategists pushing for Republican presidential candidates to be more outspoken on abortion. Dr. Ingrid Scott is a practicing OB/GYN and director of medical affairs for the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and she joins us now. Dr. Scott, welcome. So I'd like to start just by getting your take on this op-ed. Does it surprise you, or has this long been the stance of the college?
Well, sadly, this is not surprising to me. I've seen a progression over the years of more and more pro-abortion stances taken by ACOG's leadership. I've been a member of the organization for about 30 years. They have never surveyed their membership about our feeling about the pro-abortion positions that they take. The reality is that only 7 to 14% of practicing obstetricians will perform an elective abortion. So those of us on the ground caring for women do still realize that we have a second patient, the fetus, and we do care for both of our patients. But unfortunately, there's a division within ACOG. There are good quality evidence-based recommendations that doctors follow regarding clinical issues. But on the other hand, the leadership have taken this stance, which is quite extreme. I think everybody can recognize that there must be some situations in which an abortion is not an action that should be taken. Perhaps a woman who is being coerced or for other reasons should not have an abortion. And there are some abortions that are dangerous. And yet ACOG apparently is now prioritizing abortion access over the health and safety of women. So I don't know who it is that they claim to represent anymore.
Dr. Scott, so the op-ed calls for abortion on demand and for honesty in the abortion debate. I know that both sides point to polls that advance or support their stances, but how does this stand in contrast to where the American public is? We know that we've seen a greater push for abortion access in some states through statewide measures, but when it comes to late-term abortions or abortions up to birth, where does the public stand on that?
I think everybody, is intrinsically uncomfortable with the idea of late abortions. We all have seen ultrasounds of fetuses at these later ages. We've seen perhaps children within our family or of our friends who've been born prematurely that are, struggling to survive at the same gestational ages that ACOG is now saying their lives can be ended for any reason whatsoever. I think it's good that this discussion is happening so that the American public can come to the realization that, yes, late abortions are happening. Yes, they're dangerous. Yes, they are killing babies electively, healthy babies and healthy mothers. And the other discussion that we're not having that we need to have is the fact that some of these babies are born alive and do not leave the abortion clinic alive because nobody is supervising abortion clinics to make sure that they're not actually committing infanticide. So our country's very extreme. I think most people don't realize that. And yet if you ask them consistently, they'll say, no, we should have restrictions far earlier in pregnancy.
Dr. Ingrid Scott with the Charlotte Lozier Institute, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, the financial, emotional, and physical costs of Hurricane Idalia are starting to come into focus, and communities along Florida's Gulf Coast face a long cleanup process in the aftermath of the powerful storm.
Yes, still people from Southwest Florida to North Carolina are breathing a sigh of relief tonight after Idalia's raft left less damage than they had once feared. George Thomas reports.
Idalia made landfall on Florida's west coast as a dangerous Category 3 storm with maximum sustained winds near 125 miles per hour. Those winds blowing off roofs and snapping tall trees and stop signs. Some roads in northern Florida were briefly impassable with downed power lines strewn across streets. In Tallahassee, the Florida governor's wife posting this picture on social media of a 100-year-old oak tree falling on the governor's mansion. Casey DeSantis and her 3 children were home at the time, but she says thankfully no one was injured. Meanwhile, the storm surge from Idalia inundating hundreds of businesses and leaving entire neighborhoods submerged in water. This was the scene in Crystal River, Florida. Drone footage showing widespread flooding. County sheriff officials there using rescue airboats to evacuate residents trapped by high waters. And even beyond Florida, Idalia was a harrowing experience for some.
Holy f***, that car's flying!
In Goose Creek, South Carolina, a motorist capturing this moment as a tornado sends a car flying through the air. Thankfully, no serious injuries there. Still, residents from Southwest Florida to North Carolina breathing a sigh of relief after Hurricane Idalia left less damage than feared.
just thanking God every minute that, well, we're still here, and, this stuff is nothing as long as everybody's okay.
Some communities along Florida's Gulf Coast face a long cleanup ahead.
We're going to go with it and have a good attitude about it. We can rebuild all of this.
In Perry, a small mill town located just inland from Florida's Big Bend region, where Idalia came ashore, folks were already out cleaning debris shortly after the storm's passing.
I think the city really came together. I see it in a lot of people helping people, a lot of people reaching out to each other, strangers, people I never seen before in my life. They everywhere just trying to make sure everybody else okay.
Even so, Idalia remained a serious threat after racing through Florida, moving up the southeast, bringing storm surge, damaging winds, tornadoes, and flooding rain to parts of Georgia and the Carolinas. And Operation Blessing teams hunkered down in Valdosta, Georgia during the storm, plan to stage their relief operations in Hermosa, Florida, working with their relief network partners and a local church there to hand out essential supplies.
There is needs for food currently, there's needs for water, there's needs for basic necessities that you would think that you would already have with you, but currently they don't have any.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Thank you, George. The monthly jobs report is due out tomorrow. What experts anticipate and what that means for the economy. Coming up.
Welcome back. The long and bumpy road to lower inflation just hit another pothole, with fresh data out today showing a closely watched inflation measure picking up again. July's Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, which the Federal Reserve uses to gauge inflation, climbed 3.3% last month, up from 3% in June. That's down from a peak of last summer of 7%, but still well above the Fed's 2% growth rate target. Also, core inflation, another closely watched measure, ticked up 0.1% from June to July, up to 4.2%. Well, Mark Hamrick is a senior economic analyst and the Washington bureau chief at Bankrate. Mark, welcome to you. So today's report also shows consumer spending up 0.8% in July, with a decline, though, in savings. What does that signal to you about the Fed's interest rate plans?
Good to be with you, John and Jenna. First of all, that 4.2% rise in personal consumption expenditures, the core rate, which excludes food and energy, is really one of the primary measures of inflation the Federal Reserve watches, and that's well above the Fed's 2% target. The real question for the future, of course, is whether the Fed has sufficient interest rate monetary policy tightening in the system, whether there's sufficient tightening to bring inflation down further. And as you noted there, consumers really kind of let it fly there in the latest reading. Some of that may have been somewhat heat related, as people bought more goods and may have spent more money in a sense to compensate for the heat. But we'll see whether they can sort of keep that heat going with their spending, given the fact that they were spending more money than they were taking in, the increase in spending well above the increase in incomes.
Yeah. So, Mark, the monthly employment report is due out tomorrow. What are you expecting with that?
Yes, Jenna, we expect that to show more moderation. And what I'm thinking here is that in many things we're seeing with the economy right now, we're really kind of leveling out and getting back to more of a pre-pandemic condition. And for example, with monthly hiring, last year we averaged nearly 400,000 jobs added a month, truly an unsustainable level. And in the process, of course, we've had the unemployment rate really sticking around this 3.5% range. This year so far, we've averaged only 258,000 jobs added a month, again compared to 400,000 last year. And the outlook is that we'll see further moderation, more normalization in the job market. With this report tomorrow, we expect it to show something on the order of fewer than 200,000 jobs added, and the expectation is that the unemployment rate sticks at 3.5%.
You talked about moderation in the job market, but real quickly here, what do you think accounts for the strong labor market?
Well, first of all, there were a lot of tailwinds that have been propelling the economy forward. And I really do put this in the category of, continued reopening and making up for lost time after the pandemic. There's a lot of federal spending in the system still, and that will continue to supply or provide some support to the economy going forward.
Yeah. All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Thank you, Mark. Have a great Labor Day weekend.
Thanks, Mark.
You too. Thank you.
one man's dream inches ever closer to reality. When we come back, the work that remains in order to achieve Dr. King's vision. Well, welcome back. The FBI's hate crime investigation over a racially motivated shooting targeting black people in Jacksonville, Florida over the weekend is shining a spotlight on racism in America. The shooting coincided with the 60th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Dr. King's words inspired the nation and led to major progress in the fight for civil rights, but the work is still left undone.
In this anniversary report, we examine how far our country has come in the fight for civil rights and where we should go next to bring justice and equality to all. CBN's Brody Carter brings us the story.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
August 1963, the official March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom also marked the 100th year since President Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation.
But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.
Taylor Branch, author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning trilogy about Dr. King, recalls the civil rights leader walking a fine line in order to pressure the Kennedy administration and Congress to initiate a strong federal civil rights bill.
The reason his rhetoric was so balanced was that he constantly put one foot in the Constitution and the other foot in the scriptures.
Branch tells CBN News authorities feared the March on Washington would become a bloody riot. The government shut down businesses and warned people to stay home. Instead, the world witnessed a peaceful protest, along with an iconic speech that often sounded more like a sermon.
And he could tell that it wasn't going over. And a black preacher is sensitive to the audience, and black preachers are more or less like jazz musicians. They have riffs.
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Other historians like Dr. Jamar Tisby point to those who King learned from and leaned on.
That wasn't the first time King used that phrase, I have a dream. In fact, he is said to have borrowed it from a black woman preacher named Prathia Hall. And he heard her use it in a prayer a year or two prior, and it stuck with him.
Famously, it is said, and I could not document it, but a number of people say it, that Mahalia Jackson was standing behind him and said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin."
Tisby says the march became critical in building up willpower in Congress to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act and 1965 Voting Rights Act. Some believe echoes of Dr. King's charge remain the same today as we face what Dr. King called this generation's fierce urgency of now.
If you look at jobs and unemployment, black people are still getting the short end of the stick.
In 2021, black Americans made nearly 50% less income per capita than whites, with similar disparities at the household level, meaning the poverty rate for black families is twice that of white families.
Meanwhile, the poor are getting poorer, and basic necessities from healthcare to housing is becoming much, much harder for people.
Dr. Tisby highlights the recent Supreme Court reversal of affirmative action, which he believes closed the door to future successes of black Americans, further exacerbating a white-collar culture, housing inequality, and the increasing wealth gap.
Behind you, it says, "Justice takes sides." Can you elaborate on that?
Eli Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, said, "Neutrality only helps the oppressor, never the oppressed." And what he's getting at in that phrase is the idea that we can't stand on the sidelines when issues of justice are at stake.
At the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., a traditionally conservative think tank, they're working to discover best practices and policies that build a brighter future for everyone.
One thing that you learn about America, if you study it at any length, is that we've always been divided. We're a people of different backgrounds and perspectives, and we're a democracy, and we're cantankerous, and we fight with each other. But we're at our best when we work those things out and move forward positively.
The way in which we, as a nation, are successful is that we recognize the power of equality of opportunity, individual dignity, our common humanity.
Author and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Ian Rowe, believes one solution is focusing on tools for success instead of barriers.
Those are the things that bind us together. The importance of families, faith, education. Doesn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, doesn't matter. Those are the fundamental elements of human flourishing that we have to coalesce around.
We should look at coalitions. What are like-minded groups and individuals out there, and how can we link arms and protest together, whether that's through legislation or marches or fundraising or whatever it might be? How can we gather groups of people to partner in solidarity on justice issues?
Just a short walk from where King gave his famous speech, the Stone of Hope, and carved in it is Dr. King.
We've been here for just over 2 weeks, and one of the things that we want to see is the Martin Luther King.
We spoke with a variety of visitors from California, the UK, and Germany.
It starts with us.
And there's consensus that while America and the world has come a long way thanks to Dr. King, more needs to be done to honor his legacy, fulfill his dream, and fight for justice. As a way of addressing discouragement that often happens when doing this work, Dr. Tisby believes that God is just as interested in who we become as he is in what we accomplish. That's because in growing internally, in pursuing justice, we become more like Christ. Reporting in Washington, D.C., I'm Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thank you for that report, Brody. Well, once in a super blue moon. Rare sights from last night's sky next on Faith Nation.
Finally tonight, maybe you saw it, this year's largest supermoon appeared in the sky last night.
Jenna, I went to bed early, so I missed it. But it's what astronomers call a super blue moon. It's big and bright, and it's big and bright enough, actually, for people to see around the world. From LA to Venezuela to China, people captured the rare phenomenon on camera. A supermoon means it's slightly closer to Earth, and blue because it's the second full moon in a month. What makes last night extremely rare is that both August moons were supermoons, an event that only happens once in a decade. So were you up late enough to watch?
I was not, and apparently we're going to have to wait until I think 2037 until the next one.
Couple of years. Yeah.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Have a great night.
Thanks for watching.